My name is Walter Cruz and I fix clocks for a living, not the digital kind. The kind with pendulums and brass gears and glass panels that fog up in winter. I work out of a converted carriage house behind the property I bought outside Asheville, North Carolina, 2 years after my marriage ended. The place had been a bed and breakfast in a previous life, and whoever ran it had left behind good bones, wide plank floors, a stone fireplace in the main room, a wraparound porch that caught the afternoon light in a way that made you feel briefly like everything was going to be fine. I had not spoken to my ex-wife Renata in 8 months when her younger sister showed up at the end of my driveway on a Thursday in October. I remember it was a Thursday because I had just come in from the shop and poured myself a cup of coffee that I had no intention of finishing. The leaves on the ridge had gone full amber. I was standing at the kitchen window watching a squirrel make bad decisions in the yard when I saw a car I did not recognize pull slowly off the road and stop. The woman who got out was Sylvie. She was standing beside a gray sedan with a rolling suitcase and a canvas tote over one shoulder, and she was looking at the house the way people look at something they almost didn't come to. I had met Sylvie 4 times, once at the rehearsal dinner before Renata and I got married, once at Thanksgiving the first year, once at a 4th of July party at Renata's parents' house in Greenville where nobody had enough to eat and everyone drank too much in the heat, and once briefly, at the end of a Christmas that had already gone sideways before noon. She was 31 to my 39. She taught 2nd grade at a public school somewhere in Knoxville. She had her sister's dark hair but none of her sister's sharpness. There was something quieter about her, something more careful. At that Christmas, near the end of the night, she had found me on the back porch where I had gone to get some air, and she had sat down in the other chair without asking, and we had talked about nothing for 40 minutes. Old movies, whether birds feel cold, how hard it is to find a good used bookstore anymore. Renata had come to the door and looked at us and said, "There you both are," in a tone that didn't match the words. I had not thought about that night in a long time. I set down my coffee and went to the door. She looked relieved when she saw me, which surprised me, because I had not expected her to look like anything. I had assumed there would be some official reason for her being here, something logistical, a piece of mail forwarded to the wrong address, a piece of furniture Renata had forgotten, some errand that required a human handoff. "Walter," she said, "I'm sorry to just show up like this." "You didn't call," I said, not accusingly, just noting it. "I know. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." That was honest enough that I stepped back from the door and let her in. She stood in the entryway and looked around at the house the way people do when they're trying to take stock of a life from its surfaces. The old Seth Thomas clock on the shelf above the fireplace, the stack of horological journals on the coffee table, the half-finished cup of coffee, the general evidence of a man living alone without apology. "Can I get you something?" I asked. "Water would be great," she said, "and maybe just 5 minutes to catch my breath." I got her a glass of water and we sat in the living room. The afternoon light came through the south-facing windows and made everything look warmer than it was. Outside, a crow made a long unhappy noise, and then went quiet. "How long have you been driving?" I asked. "Since early this morning," she said. "I stopped twice. I waited." She turned the water glass in both hands. "Marcus and I called off the engagement," she said. 3 weeks ago." I said I was sorry. "I'm not actually," she said. "Not anymore, but I'm—" She stopped. I didn't have anywhere obvious to go. My apartment lease ended in August and I'd been staying at his place. "My parents are in Greenville, and I can't." She stopped again. "I can't be around Renata right now. I just can't." I understood that without needing her to explain it. "You can stay here," I said. "There's a guest room. It's got its own bathroom. You can stay as long as you need." She looked at me like she was checking whether I meant it. "I mean it," I said. "I'll help with groceries," she said. "And I won't be in the way. I can grade papers in my room and you won't even know I'm here." "I have a carriage house full of clocks," I said. "I'm not exactly worried about being disturbed." Something in her face eased then. Not all the way, but a little. She was better than her word about not being in the way. She was a ghost for the first 3 days. I would hear her moving around in the kitchen early in the morning before I was up, and by the time I came downstairs she would be at the small table by the window with a mug and a stack of papers, red pen in hand, utterly absorbed. She graded with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. I worked. That is what I do when I don't know what else to do. There was a German bracket clock on my bench that needed a complete movement service. Worn pallets, a cracked suspension spring, a mainspring that had lost its set. I lose track of time when I'm working on a clock, which has always struck me as fitting. On the fourth day, she brought lunch out to the carriage house. She set a plate on the empty stool beside my bench, a sandwich, some chips and apple, and said, "You forgot to eat again." Then she went back to the house before I could think of what to say. I stood there looking at the plate for a moment. Then I ate the sandwich. It was good. Turkey and sharp cheddar on sourdough, with mustard but not too much. I didn't say anything about it that evening, neither did she, but the next day there was another plate. The weekend came and the weather turned, the way October weather in the mountains does, fast and without negotiation. It rained for 2 days straight, a serious vertical rain that turned the driveway to rust-colored mud and made the ridge disappear into low clouds. We were both stuck inside, and the house, which had seemed adequately large before, became smaller. We cooked together the second evening. It wasn't planned. I was making soup, just a vegetable soup, nothing impressive, and she drifted into the kitchen and started chopping carrots without asking. And we moved around each other in the small space, with the kind of wordless coordination that takes most people years to develop. She told me she had taught second grade for 5 years, that she had almost quit after the second year and had decided to stay, and had never stopped being glad she stayed. She told me she was good at the craft of teaching, but that the paperwork was killing her slowly, one compliance form at a time. I told her I had gotten into clock repair sideways. I'd been an architectural draftsman for 11 years, got laid off in the restructuring that followed 2020, and picked up horology almost by accident during the long months of not knowing what came next. I told her there was something about mechanical movements that I found straightforwardly reassuring. Every gear has a purpose, every part is accountable, nothing hides. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's the most you've talked since I got here." "Probably," I said. "I like it," she said. And she went back to the carrots. We fell into a routine without deciding to. I was in the shop by 7:30. She was at the kitchen table with her papers. We had coffee together before I went out, not talking much, just sharing the morning quiet. Lunch appeared on the stool at noon. In the evenings we cooked or reheated things and sat at the table and talked until one of us noticed it had gotten late. There was a question she had asked me once, at a family gathering years before. I don't remember now which one. Whether I had always known I wanted to settle down, or whether it had snuck up on me. I hadn't answered well at the time. I'd said something deflecting and moved on. I thought about that question one evening while I was washing dishes and she was sitting at the table, behind me reading a novel she'd pulled from the shelf in the guest room. I thought about how much easier it would have been to answer honestly. Back then, if I had understood what honesty in that context actually required. I didn't say anything. I put the dishes away and we watched the last of the light go off the ridge. One afternoon, we had been there almost 2 weeks, she was helping me go through a box of spare parts I had bought at an estate sale in Hendersonville. Old aneroid barometers, a pile of clock hands, some dusty American movement plates that might be useful someday. She picked up a small carriage clock with a cracked crystal and turned it over in her hands. "Have you ever wondered why I left Renata's wedding early?" she said. She wasn't looking at me. I had actually. I had not thought about it in years, but at the time I had noticed her absence during the reception, and Renata had said something vague about Sylvie having a headache. "I wondered," I said. "I left because I thought you were making a mistake," she said. She set the clock down carefully. "Not about Renata, about yourself, about what you thought you deserved." She looked up. "I didn't think you'd last 3 years, you lasted 6, so I was wrong about the timeline." "You weren't wrong about the rest," said. She held my gaze for a moment, then she picked up a clock hand and examined it like it was the most interesting thing in the room. "I need to go back to Knoxville eventually," she said. "Figure out housing, get my classroom back in order." "Okay," I said. "I don't know when." "Okay, you're not going to ask me to stay longer?" "I thought about that. I don't think that's my call to make," I said. "You've been making your own calls pretty well." She was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the hickories along the fence line, and the leaves came off in a slow gold rush. She had been there 17 days when Renata called my number. I saw the name on the screen and I let it ring. 3 times and then voicemail. 15 minutes later, Sylvie's phone started buzzing on the kitchen table, and she looked at it and put it face down without answering. We didn't talk about it, but that night after dinner, Sylvie scored, "She knows I'm here." "How?" "I told our mother I was staying with a friend in Asheville." Renata figured out the rest. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "She's not happy." "About which part?" I asked. Sylvie looked at me steadily. "All of it." I nodded. I understood the geometry of this, how it would look, what Renata would decide it meant, the particular version of the story she would herself, and then tell other people. I had been inside Renata's storytelling before. I knew how it worked. Are you going to call her back? I asked. Eventually, Sylvie said, when I have something settled enough to say. She went to bed early. I sat by the fireplace for a long time with the light going low and the old Seth Thomas ticking on the shelf, marking off seconds the way it had been marking off seconds for 130 years, indifferent to everything, reliable as gravity. Renata came on a Sunday. I didn't hear her car until she was already on the porch. She must have rented something at the airport, and I didn't recognize the engine. I heard the knock and opened the door, and there she was in a wool coat I had never seen, looking like someone who had prepared very carefully for a conversation they intended to win. I need to talk to my sister, she said. She's here, I said. You can come in. I stepped back. She came inside and looked around the room the way she always looked around rooms, assessing, cataloging, deciding what to make of things. Her eyes landed on the guest room door, which was open, and then on the kitchen table, where Sylvie's coffee cup was sitting next to a stack of school papers. Sylvie had heard the door. She came out of the hallway and stopped when she saw Renata. Something passed between them that I recognized, the kind of look that carries years of accumulated history, not all of it clean. Sylvie, Renata said. Come on, let's go. Go where? Sylvie said. Back to Mom's. We'll figure everything out from there. I'm not going to Mom's, Sylvie said. You can't stay here, Renata said. Her voice was controlled, careful, but there was something underneath it. Why not? Sylvie asked. She wasn't being combative. She was genuinely asking. That was the thing about Sylvie. She asked questions and meant them. Because it's Renata stopped. She turned and looked at me, and for a moment I saw something that I hadn't expected to see. Not anger, something closer to fear. It's not appropriate, she finished. I'm 31 years old, Sylvie said. Walter's been kind to me. I'm figuring out my next move. There's nothing here that isn't exactly what it looks like. Renata turned to me. Walter, say something. Sylvie can stay as long as she wants, I said. Or leave if she wants. It's her decision. Renata stood very still for a moment. Then she said, this is, and didn't finish. She looked at her sister. You're being naive. Maybe, Sylvie said. Or maybe I'm exactly where I should be. Renata looked between us one more time. Then she picked up the car keys from where she had set them on the entry table and left. The door closed behind her without slamming, which was worse somehow than if it had. Sylvie stood in the middle of the room. Her arms were crossed, but not defensively, more like she was holding herself steady. I'm sorry, she said. That was because of me. It was because of her, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then she uncrossed her arms and went to get her coffee cup, and poured out the cold coffee and made fresh. She poured a cup for me too without asking. She set it on the counter by my elbow. I'm going to go back to Knoxville, she said. Not because she came, because it's time. I need to find an apartment and get back in my classroom and start acting like a person with a life again. That makes sense, I said. It does, she agreed. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked out the window at the gray October sky. I've been hiding here a little bit. I know. It's been a good place to hide. It's a good place in general, I said. She turned and looked at me, with an expression I could not quite read. Something careful and direct at once. You didn't tell me what you actually think, she said. About me leaving. I had been turning that over since the conversation with Renata. What I thought. What I was actually allowed to think. What it meant that I minded more than I had expected to. I think you should go back and sort things out, I said. And I think, when things are sorted, you should come back. If you want, come back here specifically, she asked. To visit, to whatever, I said. That's your call too. She was quiet. The clock ticked. The wind came off the ridge and moved through the eaves. Okay, she said finally, I'll think about that. She left on a Tuesday. I carried her suitcase to the car. She hugged me briefly at the driver's door, the kind of hug that lasts half a second longer than a casual one, and then she got in and drove down the driveway and turned onto the road heading east. I went back to the shop and put on a recording of a Chet Baker album I keep for difficult afternoons and worked on the bracket clock until it was dark. I did not call her. Not for 3 weeks, which was one of the harder things I had managed in recent memory. I told myself she needed time to move back into her life without me adding weight to the decision. She called on a Wednesday evening in early November. I found an apartment, she said. It's on the 3rd floor, which I hate, but the windows face east, and I get good morning light. That matters, I said. It does. A pause. "How's the German clock?" "Running," I said. "Clean movement. Needed a new suspension spring and some new oil, but the strike train is solid." "I have no idea what that means," she said. "It means it's going to be fine." "Good," she said. There was another pause, the comfortable kind. "I was thinking about coming back down in a few weeks. If that's still, it is," I said. "Okay." I could hear the small shift in her voice, like something settling. "I'll let you know when." She came back in December, on a Friday just before dark, with the mountains going blue-gray and the first real cold of the year coming off the ridge. She knocked even though she'd been here before. I thought that said something about her, that she still treated arrival as arrival, that she didn't assume. I opened the door and she was standing there with the same rolling suitcase and the canvas tote, and a paper bag that turned out to contain 2 containers of soup from a place in Knoxville that she said was the best soup in Tennessee, and that I was about to find out she was not wrong about. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. I stepped back and let her in. That visit lasted 9 days. I did not count them as they were happening. I counted them later from the outside, the way you count things you didn't know to pay attention to. We spent most of the time the same way we had before. I worked in the shop. She graded. We cooked in the evenings. We talked the way people talk when they are no longer trying to manage what they reveal. On the 4th evening, we were sitting on the porch with heavy blankets and the last of a bottle of Appalachian Ridge bourbon that I had been holding onto for no particular reason, and she turned to me and said, "I went and talked to a therapist last month." "About the engagement?" I asked. "About everything," she said. "The engagement, my family, the pattern I seem to have of going where I'm needed instead of where I want." "What did the therapist say?" "She said I already knew what I wanted. I was just waiting for something to make it obvious." I looked at her. "It got obvious," Sylvie said. She was looking at me with that careful, direct expression that I had been thinking about since October, and I had spent enough of my life deflecting this kind of moment that I recognized it for what it was, and I had promised myself, quietly, privately, without telling anyone, that I would not deflect it this time. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. She turned her hand over and held on. We stayed like that on the porch while the cold came in off the ridge, and the stars got clear and sharp the way they get in December at this elevation, and the clock inside marked the half hour, and the night settled around us like it had nothing urgent to do. She put in for a transfer in February. There is a public elementary school 12 minutes from my house that had an opening for the following school year. She submitted the application on a Thursday, and by the following Wednesday she had an interview. And by March she had the job. She drove down with the first load of boxes on a Saturday in late April, when the dogwoods along the driveway were doing what dogwoods do in April in western North Carolina, which is to make you feel briefly like you are living inside, something that was specifically designed to be beautiful. I had cleared the 2 rooms at the east end of the house, the ones with the morning light, and put in a proper desk and a reading chair and good shelving. I had spent 3 evenings building the shelves myself, out of walnut I had been curing in the shop for over a year, and I was proud of them in the quiet way I am proud of things I build with my hands. She walked into those rooms and stood very still for a moment. "Walter," she said. "They're your rooms," I said. "Do what you want with them." She turned around and looked at me. "You built those shelves. I had the wood. You built them for me." "The wood was going to be something eventually," I said. "This seemed better than a clock case." She laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that involves the whole face. Then she put her arms around me and held on, and I held on too, in the front hallway of the house that had been a bed and breakfast, and then mine and now was beginning, slowly and in no particular hurry, to be ours. Our daughter was born the following October. We named her June, not after anyone in particular, just because the name felt right, like something that had been waiting to be used. She has Sylvie's coloring and, so far, my tendency toward long silences and total absorption in whatever is directly in front of her. Sylvie went back to her classroom in January, part-time at first, then full. She had 3 students that year who had never held a book before they walked into her room. By May, all 3 of them were reading. I think about that sometimes. About the kind of work that compounds over time, whose results you mostly never see. I fix clocks, Sylvie fixes years. We are both trying to make sure that what keeps things moving doesn't stop on our watch. On a Saturday morning last month, June was asleep in the back room, and Sylvie was at the kitchen table with her papers, and I was standing at the window with the coffee I had every intention of finishing. The light came through the south windows the way it always does at that hour, making the room look warmer than it was. The Seth Thomas ticked on the shelf. Sylvie looked up from her papers and caught me looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. She looked at me for another moment with that expression I still cannot quite name, and then she went back to her papers. I finished my coffee. The clock kept going, the way clocks do when you take care of them. Forward, steady, without asking for anything in return.